President Richard Nixon, meeting with the CIA director, Richard Helms, basically threatening him, saying, let
Wow.
me quote, "I know who shot John," he says, "and it could become a very vigorous issue. You can count on me to cover up for the agency. It's a threat."
Roger Stone, welcome to the show, sir.
Jeremy, great to be with you.
So for those not familiar with you, Roger, I know I kind of gave a brief introduction of yourself, but if you just want to let everyone know a little bit about who Roger Stone is and what you do, sir.
Beginning with Richard Nixon, working for 3 presidential campaigns for the great Ronald Reagan, 1976, 1980, 1984. And of course, I began trying to convince Donald Trump to run for president as early as 1988, again in 2000, again in 2012, and then finally successfully in 2016. I am particularly proud of the fact that I'm a New York Times best-selling author. My book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, I think makes a compelling case using eyewitness evidence, fingerprint evidence, deep Texas politics, that Lyndon Johnson is the man who had the motive, means, and opportunity to kill John F. Kennedy. In fact, I think if you read that book, you will come away with the overwhelming conviction that that is the case. I do a daily show called Stone Zone, The Stone Zone, at stonezone.live every day at 5 o'clock Eastern. And now that I have been taken out of Twitter jail, where I was banned for life in 2017, with the notoriety that comes with a 2-year witch hunt at the hands of Robert Mueller and the deep state, my show has really taken off in a very positive way. So I would urge your followers, folks who watch you, to tune in 5 o'clock Eastern every day at stonezone.com, stonezone.live, and check it out.
I know you've also done some great Twitter spaces that I've been absolutely riveted by, and with Grant Cardone and a few other people as well. But Roger, for those people listening, I really want to focus on your book about the Kennedy assassination. I've been reading it. I'm not 100% done with it, but I am absolutely riveted in the background information. So for those listening, you mentioned a little bit about your connection with President Nixon and how this kind of gave you some insight into the Kennedy assassination. So tell our audience a little bit about, those conversations with President Nixon and really what got you looking at this.
In order to understand the dynamics involved in the murder of John F. Kennedy, you really need to read 2 of my books, Nixon's Secrets, which really lays out the truth about Watergate, and The Man Who Killed Kennedy, the case against LBJ, because Watergate and the Kennedy assassination are related.
Mm-hmm.
It's not incidental that 4 of the Watergate burglars were on the scene in Dealey Plaza in 1963. So 4 of the Watergate burglars arrested in 1972 were actively involved in the Kennedy assassination in 1963. At least 3 of the Watergate burglars were on the Central Intelligence Agency payroll and reporting to their handlers during the Watergate break-in. How coincidental.
Mm-hmm.
Very recently, I unearthed a long overlooked Watergate era tape, which you can hear President Richard Nixon meeting with the CIA director, Richard Helms, basically threatening him, saying, let me quote, "I know who shot John," he says, "and it could become a very vigorous issue. You can count on me to cover up for the agency. It's a threat, and a not very thinly veiled one." With these 2 new tranches of classified information, the first amount declassified by President Donald Trump more recently, data declassified by President Joe Biden, both presidents still holding about 20% back from the American people, we get closer and closer to the fact that the Central Intelligence Agency was a central player in the murder of John F. Kennedy. Their motives are very clear. They were unhappy with his handling of the Bay of Pigs invasion. They were unhappy with his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis because they knew in real time that John and Robert Kennedy didn't face Nikita Khrushchev down, who then removed the missiles from Cuba. We made a secret deal to remove our missiles from Turkey and Italy, changing the balance of power in the European theater in return for a pledge by Khrushchev, never actualized, to remove the missiles from Cuba. What really got me started, as you point out, on this entire venture was a conversation I had with President Nixon in, I guess it was 1989. Now, Nixon was a very private man, very buttoned down, very circumspect, very forward looking. I mean, he was disinterested in the past and very focused on the future. It's hard to get him to talk about some of the even great events of history that he had witnessed or been a party to. So you couldn't get him to talk about his kitchen debate with Khrushchev or being attacked by communist mobs in Caracas, Venezuela, or the debate with John Kennedy, or his relationship with Dwight Eisenhower, who he served for 8 years as vice president, or his clash with Senator Joe McCarthy. But when Nixon had a couple drinks, when he got,
I find your description of his martini. He wouldn't need very much, and he'd loosen up very quickly.
he would become positively loquacious after a couple of drinks. And on one of those occasions where he was mixing cocktails and I was helping him drink them, I asked him directly, who killed John Kennedy? He stared into his drink for a moment. He looked up at me and he said, let me say this. The Warren Commission was the biggest goddamn hoax in American history.
Wow.
He continued to stare into his drink. Then I said, yes, but who really killed Kennedy? He looked at me again and he said, let me put it to you this way. Lyndon and I both wanted to be president. The difference was I wasn't willing to kill for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was from that point on that I decided that I was going to research the Kennedy assassination. And I came to the stunning conclusion, as I lay out in my book, that it was Johnson who was staring at two ongoing corruption investigations, the Billy Sal Estes investigation. Billy Sal Estes was a flamboyant Texas wheeler dealer. Johnson had gotten him multi-million-dollar agriculture contracts. He was kicking back to Johnson tens of thousands of dollars. And also the Bobby Baker scandal. Baker was the Senate Sergeant of Arms. He was Johnson's right-hand man, essentially Johnson's bag man. Both of them under intense investigation in 1963. In fact, the Senate hearings into Baker's abuses and corruption actually opened on November 22nd, 1963. Johnson was on the phone throughout that day to see when and if his name would come up. He was a man staring into the abyss.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, who was attorney general, had begun telling people that Johnson would be dropped from the 1964 ticket and would likely be going to prison. So for LBJ, it was kill or be killed. Now, in the JFK researcher community, there are a lot of competing theories. There are a lot of competing loyalties. There are a lot of people who are certain that they have the one and only answer. So, for example, there are those who say, oh, Kennedy was killed by the CIA. Well, they're not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But there are others who say, no, Kennedy was killed by organized crime. Well, they're not wrong either. There are others who say, well, Kennedy's murder was engineered by Big Texas Oil. They're actually correct also. There are still others who say, because of his commitment to a silver-backed dollar or a gold-backed dollar.
Mm-hmm.
Kennedy's case, he preferred silver. Kennedy's murder was engineered by the big banks. Well, they're not wrong either. The point, of course, is that Lyndon Johnson is the common spoke between all of these entities. When Johnson was the majority leader of the U.S. Senate, he takes the uncommon step of appointing himself to the subcommittee of the Defense Appropriations Committee, where the Central Intelligence Agency's black box budgets are secretly prepared and approved. Lyndon Johnson is the paymaster for the CIA. He is involved in the CIA's expansion after Truman signs them into law in 1950.
Mm-hmm.
He is also an intimate of his next-door neighbor, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover knew that he was facing mandatory retirement in 1964 under President John F. Kennedy. He knew that Robert Kennedy was ready to show him the door, and only the president can waive that mandatory requirement. So Hoover had not only a hatred for the Kennedys, but also an inherent interest in their removal.
Mm-hmm.
Johnson was being paid by Carlos Marcello, the mob boss of Texas, to protect illegal gambling operations in Houston and Dallas and San Antonio. So Johnson was on the pad to Marcello. Marcello had financed a number of Johnson's early presidential campaigns. Johnson was very connected to Wall Street through Elliot Janeway, a well-known columnist, investor, and he knew that Wall Street and the banks were ready to move to paperback money, fiat currency that is currently destroying our economy.
Yeah.
So Johnson has a common spoke to all of the entities, including Big Texas Oil, where John and Robert Kennedy want to repeal the oil depletion allowance, costing the Texas oil billionaires hundreds of millions of dollars more in taxes. Johnson is the common thread throughout this, I hate to use it, conspiracy. Now, we've all seen the famous picture of Lyndon Johnson with his hand up, taking the oath of office on Air Force One. Why is he doing that?
Mm-hmm.
There's no legal necessity for that. The instant the president is legally declared dead, the vice president is automatically a president of the United States with the full powers of that office. So there was no reason for that ceremony other than to twist the knife in Robert Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
LBJ actually calls Bobby Kennedy back in Washington and says, "Get me the oath of office. I'm going to take the oath." He is twisting the knife in Robert Kennedy.
Well, I think that's one of the really interesting things, Roger, is like, even reading Jim Marrs's book, Crossfire, The Plot That Killed Kennedy. I know you referenced Jim Marrs a bit in your book. He seems to, for the most part, leave LBJ alone, which is interesting because he really is this uniting thread for a lot of things, because there's this back and forth between Bobby Kennedy and LBJ, this back and forth between Bobby Kennedy and Hoover. So there's a lot of kind of antagonism behind the scenes, but without LBJ, I don't think any of this works.
Well, look, I had great respect for Jim Marrs, and I do use his book with accreditation in my book. But even Oliver Stone, after he read my book, sent me a note saying that he wished he had read my book prior to making his movie JFK, because he really didn't understand the central role that Lyndon Johnson plays in the entire drama. Cui bono, as they say in Latin, who benefits. All of those entities I talked about had an interest in the removal of John Kennedy, but one man's removal was acute. The man who was under scrutiny by the U.S. Senate for corruption that very day, and we now know, in retrospect, that Drew Pearson, the single most influential columnist of the day, had scheduled a column for Sunday, the 23rd, that exposed Lyndon Johnson for taking a payoff in return for the delivery of a major defense contract to General Dynamics. That was the end of the line for LBJ, and he knew it. So at this point, the Warren Commission story narrative is completely discredited. I have a column at my new Substack coming out here shortly, which I prove to you that Warren Commission member Gerald Ford, then a congressman from Michigan, later president of the United States, at the suggestion of J. Edgar Hoover and former CIA Director Allen Dulles, physically changes the official autopsy diagram, taking a pencil and moving the depiction of a wound in Kennedy's upper back to the back of his neck to accommodate the government's completely phony magic bullet theory. The idea that John Kennedy was shot 3 times, all from the back. There are only 3 shots. First of all, no government sharpshooter of any talent or quality or ranking has ever been able to duplicate those 3 shots within the time sequence required. And secondarily, 13 doctors and nurses see an entry wound in John F. Kennedy's throat. When they take him to Parkland Hospital, they immediately perform a tracheotomy to be able to disguise that as an entry wound from the back rather than an entry wound from the front. There's also a blowout wound in the black on the right rear of Kennedy's head, the size of a grapefruit. By the time the body gets to Bethesda Medical Center in Washington, that has been repaired. There's no notation in the autopsy, although the doctors, particularly Dr. Crenshaw, the emergency room doctor in Dallas, records seeing it in his book, as do multiple other physicians and nurses. Mm-hmm. So the bottom line, of course, is that Kennedy is shot multiple times. There are more than 3 bullets. He is shot from the front and the back, and this continues to be concealed from the American people. What's interesting is that even today, 73% of the people in a Gallup poll that's taken yearly do not believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and are not certain that he was the assassin.
So I want to get back to this in just a second because I also want to talk about the Jack Rubenstein conundrum. But I want to talk a little bit about LBJ as a person because I think historically, we hear about he helped with civil rights, and we don't really hear about who Johnson was as a person. And when I read your book, it's a little bit shocking. LBJ the person, he sounds totally unelectable. So I guess this is what
Lyndon Johnson was: a functioning lunatic. I mean, he was a deeply flawed man. He was an alcoholic. He was a pill popper. He was a sadist. He was a coward, a physical coward. They called him Lion Lyndon for a reason. He stole his election to the Senate in a corrupt deal involving one particular county and a group of corrupt figures by 48 votes. When I say he was a sadist, he liked to conduct White House staff meetings while sitting on the toilet defecating, which he did to humiliate, the Ivy League aides that he had inherited from John F. Kennedy. He didn't just do it because he was crude. He did it because he could.
Yeah.
He was a shameless womanizer. He was an egomaniac. He was epically corrupt. No major piece of legislation, no appropriation moved in the 1950s without a payoff to Lyndon Johnson. He managed to become fabulously wealthy as a member of the U.S. Senate. I think it was President Harry Truman who said, "Show me a man who gets rich in politics and I'll show you a crook." He was a crook, but he was mentally unbalanced. This is, I think, one of the more interesting things about my book. It is not only an explanation of what happened in the murder of John F. Kennedy, but it's an accurate portrait of the unhinged lunatic that Lyndon Johnson was. Civil rights, he killed every civil rights piece of legislation through the 50s. As a Senate Majority Leader, he killed every Voting Rights Act, he killed every Open Housing Act, and so on. In 1958, he engineers the opposition to the 1958 Civil Rights Bill but he doesn't put his name on the Southern Manifesto. He merely writes it. That's because he was planning to run for president in 1960, and he knew that Black Americans were a growingly important constituency in the Democratic Party. Not as big a constituency as they would come after the Great Society, after his social programs. He was, of course, the first president to dip into the Social Security Trust Fund. Almost all of the country's structural economic problems today can be traced back to the financial shenanigans of Lyndon Johnson. No, he was not a great proponent of civil rights. He was a lifelong segregationist. And he very famously said, "I'll have those N-word voting Democratic for the next 100 years." So this was all politics to him. He is, without any question, probably our worst president.
So in terms of that, then, like, I know there's kind of the organized crime background of, they organized crime helped Kennedy get elected, but then Bobby Kennedy turns against organized crime, so there's antagonism going on there. So I guess, how do these threads come together then with Johnson? Like how does this thing go down, Roger?
Well, as you correctly point out, Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy, very controversial, had served as Franklin Roosevelt's ambassador to Great Britain, was partners with Frank Costello in the bootlegging business, controlled the illegal liquor trade from New York all the way up to the Canadian border, and he went to the mob chieftains in Chicago in a big conclave and said that he wanted $1 million. And in return from the help of the mob, both financially and in terms of twisting arms to elect John Kennedy in 1960, that he would see that the deportation proceedings against Carlos Marcello and Santo Trafficante, two major mob bosses of the era, would be dropped. After the election, Robert Kennedy became Attorney General. John Kennedy's brother, Joe Kennedy's other son, younger son, and Kennedy, rather than keep the deal, went after Marcello and Trafficante extremely aggressively in an attempt to deport them from the country. So the mob was double-crossed. But Johnson is being paid by the mob, specifically by a man named Jack Halfer. How do we know this? Halfer would be convicted on some other minor crime, and he was pardoned on November 23rd, 1963. Wow. So Johnson is connected to the mob. Johnson is connected to Big Texas Oil. Johnson is connected to the CIA. Johnson is connected to the FBI. The Secret Service director, John Rowley, the first man to bound up the stairs at Andrews Air Force Base to embrace the new president, Lyndon Johnson, got his first job in government from Congressman Lyndon Johnson. And as I write in my book, all of these actors within government rationalize the murder of Kennedy because they're all aware of Kennedy's drug addiction. They're all aware of the fact that John Kennedy is being treated by a doctor in New York called Dr. Max Jacobson, who was using...
That sent me down a whole rabbit hole, by the way, Roger. I ended up talking to my dad about it. He's in his 60s, and he's all about Dr. Feelgood, and I was like really surprised the number of lives this guy ruined. Like when you look at the number of celebrities connected to him.
Yeah, Dr. Max Jacobson is a New York practicing physician who has a very early proprietary blend of what is in fact crystal meth. He's attending Frank Sinatra. He's attending Maria Calais, the opera singer, Leonard Bernstein, the conductor, Aristotle Onassis, the billionaire, Nelson Rockefeller, the governor of New York. All of these people believe that they're being treated with a blend of vitamins and enzymes that is increasing their energy. None of them realize that they're being given, essentially amphetamines that are jacking them up. But John Kennedy, because of his war injuries, has a terrible problem with pain. He has difficulty walking. He's required to wear a back brace. Yet history now records that he is chasing after 18-year-old interns, and that he is, to say the least, sexually extraordinarily reckless, more reckless than even Bill Clinton, if
Wow.
such thing is possible. I think this is attributable to his drug addiction, but you can see how the intelligence services rationalize this. Oh my God, the man's a drug addict. He may give away the store. He may make these concessions to Nikita Khrushchev. He could sell the country out to Russia. We have to remove him. There's an entire book on this, by the way, entitled Dr. Feelgood. I recommend it because I know how this works. There are liberals out there saying, "Oh, I saw Roger Stone on with Jeremy Slayton. He was making up all kinds of stuff about John Kennedy." Now, this is all very heavily documented. In fact, when President Kennedy goes to Vienna for the summit with Nikita Khrushchev, Jacobson's name can be found on the manifest
Hmm.
in the presidential traveling party. He was an attending physician. That's because he was shooting John Kennedy up on that trip, and it is recorded that Kennedy was disturbed because Khrushchev kept delaying the beginning of the meeting. So Kennedy required multiple injections to, quote unquote, keep his edge.
Wow.
And at a certain point, Dr. Jacobson began to become concerned that Kennedy could overdose, and therefore he had the president sign a waiver giving him immunity if there was some deleterious side effect. So I think that the fact that the Secret Service and the FBI were well aware of the fact of Kennedy's addiction and that he was being treated by Jacobson is used to rationalize his murder in the name of national security.
Do you think addiction? I don't know if you've seen the new Elvis Presley movie. It was kind of interesting. There's this doctor, Dr. Nicolopoulos, and he's basically helping Elvis just shoot up all the time, and it was part of the problem with him. And I'm curious if, looking at, obviously that shows situations like this happen, because I think this might be slightly unbelievable to people, but this happens. And I guess looking at it, do you think that was part of a control mechanism, right? Like how they don't want celebrities to leave. Do you think in this case, getting JFK addicted to drugs was a control mechanism for someone? I don't know if it's, the intelligence agencies, whoever it may be. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we know that Robert Kennedy became aware of the treatments that Dr. Jacobson was giving to John Kennedy, that he got a hold of some of the medication, sent it out to an FBI lab. They told him what it really was. He confronted his brother and said, "Look, the stuff is going to kill you. It's really bad for you." And John Kennedy said, "Look, I don't care if it's horse piss. It makes me feel better." I
Wow.
mean, you have to recognize the gravity of John Kennedy's war wounds. He was a genuine war hero, and I don't know that he was. I don't know that Jack Kennedy didn't find Dr. Feelgood on his own.
Hmm.
I think in this particular case, those who murdered him actually used his drug use as a rationale.
Hmm.
I haven't seen the new Elvis movie. I'm very anxious.
You should definitely see it. Like it's really interesting because it's kind of like it gives you the idea of like what people that control celebrities are like. It's dark, but the guy that plays Elvis is really good. Um,
Check it out.
But anyway, the thing I wanted to get into then, Roger, is the whole idea of Jack Ruby, because his character in this whole thing is just odd. And you can correct me if I'm wrong at this, but there was actually, he was also known as Jack Rubenstein, and he also had a connection to Johnson, if that's correct?
Yes. So it's very interesting. Obviously, Jack Ruby is seen on national television murdering Lee Harvey Oswald, essentially to silence him. What does Oswald say when he is apprehended, when he is in public? He yells, "I'm a patsy," he says. "I didn't shoot anyone." And indeed, there are no nitrates, no powder burns on Oswald's chest or on his arm. So we're asked to believe that he had shot this leaky $29 Italian mail order rifle, an army carbine, Carcano rifle, yet there's no evidence he shot a gun that day. There alone is evidence that he is not the shooter.
Hmm.
But the Warren Commission tells us that Jack Ruby has no known association with organized crime. This is a joke because Jack Ruby's club, the Carousel Club, is owned by Carlos Marcello.
Right.
Ruby had worked as a button man, had run casinos in Cuba for Marcello, had strong-armed people for the mob in Chicago. When Richard Nixon is watching, like the rest of America, is watching the scene unfold on television in his New York apartment, according to Nick Ruey, now deceased, who was traveling aide to Nixon. Nixon sees Ruby on the screen, jumps out of his chair and says, "I know that man. I know that man." And it turns out that Lyndon Johnson, as a congressman, had brought Jack Ruby, to Richard Nixon and said, "Look, Dick, you have some excess budget money on the House Un-American Activities Committee budget. I would really like Rubenstein to be picked up as a committee informant. He's got a lot of great sources. And in fact, the clerk of the House of U.S. Representatives has preserved a payroll record showing that Jack Ruby, was on the payroll of the U.S. Congress at the request of Congressman Richard Nixon, but really as a courtesy to Congressman Lyndon Johnson. This connects Johnson to Ruby. Ruby's explanation as to why he killed Oswald was that he felt sorry for the Kennedy children after the murder of their father. This is an absurdity, but more importantly, you can go to YouTube and see this now. There is a clip of newsreel footage in which Ruby is being led down a hallway after his arrest. He's in handcuffs, and reporters are shouting questions at him. And one reporter says, Jack, how could this happen? Who did this? And Ruby says, look at the man at the top, the man at the very top. Mm-hmm. They said, Jack, what do you mean? And he says, let me put it this way. If Adlai Stevenson were vice president, this never would have happened. Mm-hmm. And at that point, Ruby is squired away and silenced. There it is right there. Ruby himself fingering Lyndon Johnson as the main perp.
And I think it's interesting, Roger. I'm sure you're aware of this. Tucker had done something a few weeks ago when the new documents came out, talking about the CIA psychiatrist that basically was treating Ruby. And it's very interesting how, I guess, would love to hear how you react to that evidence being released recently. It's, they were kind of covering the trail in a way.
Well, Ruby would die in prison of cancer, but only after being injected by government doctors. So I think Ruby was a loose end that needed to be silenced. Lee Harvey Oswald was a loose end as well. Now, we are told, as you know, that Oswald not only killed John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963, but he also killed Officer J.D. Tippit. There's only one eyewitness who identifies Oswald. Two other witnesses identify a shooter who does not meet the description of Oswald. But here's what we know for a certainty. The spent shells on the ground at the site of Tippit's murder are from an automatic. Yet, when Lee Harvey Oswald is finally arrested in a Texas movie theater several blocks away, the gun that he has with him is a revolver. So it is not possible for Oswald to have killed Tippit with that gun. Another loose end that no one's ever been able to explain, but I do reflect in my book, is that Oswald leaves the Texas School Book Depository building. He gets, by a combination of bus and foot, back to the boarding house where he rents a room. And during the time that he's in a room, according to his landlady, a Dallas police officer's car rolls up to the front of the building, toots the horn twice, and drives away. We still have no explanation as to what that is about. So Tucker has done an extraordinary job of peeling back the layers of the onion regarding the Kennedy assassination. The important thing here, I guess, is to recognize that there's one continuous thread. The people who killed John F. Kennedy, including the intelligence agencies, are the same forces who removed Richard Nixon from office in
Hmm.
Watergate. They are the same forces who attempted to remove Donald Trump from office based on the entire Russian collusion hoax. I think most of your viewers probably know that I was charged with lying to Congress in order to cover up the Russian collusion hoax.
Well, Roger, I know you have another interview that you got to get out for, so I want to make sure we get you out in time for that, sir. So for people listening, I want people to grab the book because I do highly recommend it. It's a great read. I know I'm almost done with it, but I recommend people get it. It's called The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. So where can people find you? Where can people find that? And also, how can people support you as well?
Sure. The best place to go for the book is to go to stonezone.com in the shop. stonezone.com. There you can get an autographed copy of the book. I'm happy to sign it for you. I'm even happy to personally inscribe it to you. stonezone.com. You can go to my Substack, rogerstone.substack.com, to see the latest writings. And also, I'm doing this thing called Stone Talks, which are brief audio hits of information and political developments. You can also catch me, as I said earlier, 5 o'clock Eastern every single day at stonezone.live. I do a 1-hour show of news, politics, history, style, food, fashion, drink, lots of drinks. You want to check that out.
And everyone,
I am now moving to Locals at locals.com. We're going to be doing something called the Martini Hour. I announced that late yesterday. Still in formation. We haven't scheduled the first one yet, but we will do so. But you can go to stonezone.com for all things Stone.